Before we jump in today, you want to do a little reflection? I'd love to hear how people's holiday was, how Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur was. Any highlights to share with people?
I'll remind you about Kings 2, 1425. Which is about, it has nothing to do with this class.
Okay, but we were diving deep into Yonah ben Amittai was referred to in Kings 2.
Kings 2, chapter 14, verse 25.
So if anybody's curious about other references to Jonah, talk to Ron. So any highlights from the holiday?
It's over.
Yeah. There's another whole week. Now we have the fun week.
Yeah. Those two are over.
So that's actually,
It's funny though,
It's a whole month almost.
there is a definite period. You say, oh, good, it's over. Now let's get on to the year and let's get to the serious stuff, but the real work.
yeah, interesting. Yeah, I definitely.
Was
Yeah.
preparation and,
Yeah. Right. Yeah, I think in a sense, I mean, it's just such a marathon that there is a sense of, right, the work is every day. Every day is a Yom Kippur in a way. You want to always be working on tshuva, which is what our topic is going to be. So that's a great segue, but I want to hear some more highlights. Jerry?
No, it always strikes me around these holidays about how driven the Jewish religion is by the calendar.
Yeah, yeah.
Kind of role it plays in our life.
You guys, these are two perfect segues. So the fact that the work of tshuva isn't over yet, that we still get this window until Hoshana Rabbah, until the end of Sukkot. And then the next being how driven by the calendar we are. That's actually, you're going to think that Jerry was a plant.
And also-
to say that.
You can pay me later.
Okay, I'll pay you later.
the fact that we are very conscious, because if we come to shul, we're conscious of when there is a new month
Uh-huh,
and when it's going to be light out and when it's not.
yep, exactly.
Or the moon, we know, or we look at the moon and we say, okay, it's the 15th of the month,
Yeah.
which is sort of a shocking thing for us today.
Yeah, these are all literally going to be exactly what we're talking about today. Nelson, can you hear the room? Can you hear me?
Nelson?
I don't know, somebody else has their hand up though.
Oh, there.
Can you hear me on Zoom or no? Zoom, can you hear? Yes, no?
No. He put his hand up.
No, he's not hearing because he's not responding.
The
Send him a chat.
Oh, we feel that how we're tied agriculturally.
agriculturally?
Yeah. And our holiday.
May I say something about the moon?
Agriculture.
Go ahead.
Yeah, just right after Jackie, 1 second, Ruth. So how tied we are to agriculture. Yeah, so many of our holidays and Hagim are around agricultural inflection points or transition.
And even if we do good things, we get the rain.
Yes, right. We talked about that with Avinu Malkeinu, right? That the rain is a blessing. Yes, Ruth.
I want to say something about the moon. Rachel works in a school, and when some kids act up, some of the teachers said, "Is it a full moon?" And Rachel says to them, "No." She can't explain to him.
Tonight, there's supposed to be a harvest moon if we can see it, which they don't think we will.
That's right, right? The idea that when it's a full moon, that it impacts our behavior. Well, we know that the moon has so much impact on gravitational force and the tides and right, there's the physics of it all, but then there's sort of the astrological, which then gets a little bit questionable in terms of Judaism and astrology, and is there room for one within the other and all of that. But we certainly are a moon people, and the idea that it can impact behavior or seasons or how much we're dependent on it is
Many big sweet.
how many birds we'll have at night. Oh, birds.
Baby.
Interesting. Well, and also just the menstrual cycle being, the moon being a powerful symbol for that. It was like Rosh Chodesh is a very big deal in certain feminist circles as well. I feel that we may have lost
their holiday. Rabbi.
Ugh, I feel bad.
It was always a women holiday.
I'm just gonna let Rabbi Foster know real quick. Hmm,
You asked about like, someone said, oh, the holidays are over. Many, many years ago, a rabbi gave a sermon that said, you come the 2 hardest days of the year, come the rest of the year.
right,
It's not so hard.
right.
And that's, can't say I remember a lot of sermons, but that way. I was
My hu-
in my head.
My husband would always say that. He would say, you know, why do we come on the worst days,
Yeah.
the longest service?
Right.
And the tense this time, come when it's more fun.
I used to say that to prospective members who said, oh, can I come for Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur? Like, you can, but you can't do it based on that.
Right, exactly,
Yeah.
right? It's why it's so hard. The degree of difficulty is so hard because you have people who are the least familiar with the service coming for the longest and most difficult service. So it's a challenge. I'd like
That
to
was a turn off.
it's a turn off, right? You could use harsher languages, yeah. So we've had a lot of interesting, I hope, topics. Today, we're going to talk about tshuva as a natural cycle. So I want to continue our theme of tshuva, given that we have until Hoshana Rabbah, till the end of Sukkot, to continue, and the rest of the year, obviously, to do the work of tshuva. There is an interesting thing in the law we get for new moon offerings. Oh, you logging into Zoom?
I just wanted to see, I wanted to make
It's
sure.
working.
It is working.
Oh, weird. Maybe it was on his end. Okay. So this actually should be from Numbers 28. I apologize for the typo. It's not from Sota, which is a tractate of Talmud. This is from Numbers. So this is Torah 28, chapter 28. Can we have somebody read, this is what you bring on the new moon? Anyone want to volunteer? Go ahead, Lynn. You can jump right in. This is the first text. It
And you
says
read-
Sota 12, but that's a
Yeah.
typo. It should be Numbers 28. I apologize.
Oh, on your new moon, you shall present, and there shall be one goat as a sin offering to God to be offered in addition to the regular burnt offering and its libation.
Good. So on its face, there's nothing weird about this. But if you, and I cut a little bit of what the details of the offerings are, but the important part is in that end there. Useir izim echad lechatat leHashem. And if I were to tell you to find something weird about that phrase, what might stand out? Useir izim. So that's talking about the one goat as a sin offering. That's lechatat. It's like all chet, right? Chatat is sin. La Hashem. To or for God. Le can be two or it can be four. The lamed there could be two or four.
Adonai is, isn't it of?
As if God was the sinner.
Oh, okay, Ruth. So say more about your theory. What do you mean?
Lechatat l'Adonai.
Weird,
Did
right?
he sin? Why do we have to give God that goat or whatever it is?
Good. So Ruth hit it right on the head. That's what the rabbis for our Midrash today are going to pick up on. Remember, Midrash comes to address questions you might have, but doing it in a intertextual way. It's not just commentary like the Mefarshim who Rashi comes in and says this. Midrash will jump off creatively from a confusion or something interesting in the text, often bringing other verses to interpret, right? So that is their jumping off point. They look at this and they say, lechatat leHashem. This is the only place.
Connecting.
Good, okay, good. I hope this works now. There are other places where it mentions what to bring as a gift offering for God. This is the only instance, this place where it's leHashem. To or for God. So that's an oddity. And the rabbis are going to address that in the main midrash that we're gonna focus in on today. Nelson, hi, can you hear us? Can you hear us?
Put your,
No.
No?
It's him.
Shoot.
I think it's him, because
It's him, because it worked on my
I'll
phone.
say
he often has a problem. with it.
Ron, log on.
Oh, well, he's in Florida.
Ahadia. I wonder.
I didn't try to Zoom yesterday.
What?
So,
the program, yeah.
Really?
was that in here?
Yeah, it was,
Uh,
In here?
I
Okay,
know, but it was not.
Dad, Okay, well, I'm typing in the chat. I don't know if you can see. Nothing. Okay, sad.
He probably doesn't have.
Oh, he got an excuse not to be here at least.
Yeah, right. No, I appreciate everybody being here. And I don't want to give too much class time away for technical issues. So let's keep going. This is our Midrash for today. We have two, but this is our featured one. You go ahead, Ron.
I didn't understand what Ruth said and what you said, but it's
Right.
It's the same lamed. In one place, it means for sins to God, I think.
No, exactly right. So if you read it as two, there's nothing weird about this. You
Right.
bring your sin offerings to God. Nothing weird about that. But if you read it, look could also be for.
That's what I'm saying.
So if it's a
One of
chatat
four-
for
one's
God.
4 and one's 2.
So that is what Ruth is saying.
Okay,
If you read
I
it,
didn't catch.
Ruth's
what she
point
said.
is that if you say
Didn't
it's,
register.
that's okay. Ruth is saying if you say it's for God, all of a sudden, God in a sense is now the sinner, quote unquote, because you're bringing a sin offering for God. You only bring a sin offering when you're guilty of something.
Yeah. Oh, you are.
Correct, FOR. So if you're bringing a sin offering for God, the implication there is that God needed a sin offering because God sinned. Radical. That's a radical and epichorus, right? That's a
That's an interesting definition of sin.
go ahead, say more.
Well, what is a sin? It's an act against God's law.
Right, so you could say it's paradoxical. How could God even be capable of sinning if the definition of sinning is going against God's rules? Great point.
Except that we say you can sin against each other. Isn't that what Yom Kippur is about?
Yes, right, but I think the sense there,
Is against God and Rosh Hashanah is against.
well, both Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur only clears you of sins against God. The work of appeasing your fellow, well, it's everything. I mean, the point is Yom Kippur in itself and Rosh Hashanah, all of it, even Slichot, all of this atones people for sins against God. You have to actively appease your fellow person in order for you to be atoned of those sins on Yom Kippur Rosh Hashanah, right? So the day itself is guarantees, if you do it, that your sins against God are forgiven, right? That's the Day of Atonement. But it does not clear you of sins against other people if you didn't try to make things right. If you didn't try to reconcile. You have to reconcile with people in order for Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah to bring any atonement. But really, it's just between you and God, the Day of Atonement, because it doesn't absolve you of sins against other people.
What happens if you approach a person and you ask him 3 times to
Forgive.
Then you're
forgive
absolved.
and he's not
Correct.
accepting it?
Then you're absolved because you tried 3 times. But it can't just be forgive me. No, forgive me. No, forgive me. No, it has to be right. You're right. You wait until they cool down. Time has to go by. There's a whole guideline for this. But if after 3 times you sincerely try to do tshuva and they are denying you that,
Give up.
then you're right. You are clear. Now, that doesn't mean that what you did, because there are cases where the person who is refusing forgiveness arguably is in the right, so to speak. That's hard. It's hard to judge so black and white. But there are some sins that are arguably unforgivable, right? So that doesn't mean that you're not required, you're not obligated. You can refuse to forgive, but as Jews and obviously in the penitential season, you really want to reserve that for like the most unforgiving, because you really do, we want to be a forgiving people. We want to.
If you refuse to forgive someone, are you not then making a hate against God?
That is a great question. It's a great, and I would say that so Ron was saying, if you refuse to forgive someone, is that a sin? Is that a chet against God? Because you're denying somebody the ability to do tshuva in a sense. But I think the truth is that doing tshuva means more than saying I'm sorry, right? So that's a big part of it.
I mean, it means when you're presented with the same situation,
you won't do it again, right?
you
That's
don't do it.
Maimonides' highest level of tshuva, is if faced with the same opportunity, you don't do it. Now, for some people, it would be dangerous to ever give them that second chance, right? For instance, if there's like a camp counselor who mistreated a child, you would not hire that counselor again in order for them to do tshuva and be given that other opportunity and then to choose not to, right? So there are cases like that where unfortunately, like it is not the responsible thing to do to allow them to achieve that highest form of tshuva, being faced with the opportunity to do it again and making a different choice.
But why can't, but that means certain people never could get to teshuva. And if someone murders someone, yeah, you have to sort of,
Right, you can't do it directly. It can't be with that person, but it could be with their family, it could be with their loved ones, it could be, but there are some things that are irreparable.
Somebody, is that a sin against the person you did it to, or a sin against God? It's a sin against God at that point.
If which one?
If you murder someone.
It's certainly a sin against the person you murdered, but certainly also a sin against God. I would say it's both. I think it's a false dichotomy to say, is it only a sin against God or a person? I think it's both. We're all made in the image of God. So you're affronting God's image by snuffing out a manifestation of God's image in the world. Also, if you destroy one life, you've destroyed an entire world.
And you have just ruined the person who's murdered, the family. and-
Everything, right? There's so
Yeah.
much, right?
There's-
Right. So these are all very good and deep conversation points, but I want us to focus on
But they're not
turn to the
Midrash.
Midrash now. All right. So let's dive in. So I just wanted to give us context for how the rabbis are reading it to justify this Midrash now. It's saying here, and this is the only place where it's saying Le Hashem, Le meaning for God, Chatat for God. How is it possible that God sinned? That's the question in the Midrash. Who wants to start? It's a long one, so we might alternate, but who wants to read the Midrash? Please, thank you.
Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi raises a contradiction between two verses. It is written, and God made the two great lights. And it is also written in the same verse, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night.
Wait, I want to pause. What's the contradiction?
it says two great lights, and then it's saying there's a lesser light, a greater
Good.
light and a lesser light.
Right, and what lights are we talking about?
And
Uh,
sun and the moon, but they didn't know this. We know this. The moon does not give off light.
Right.
It's only a reflection.
Right. In Hebrew, it's the me'orot, right? And it says ha-me'orot ha-gedolot. Gedolim, thank you, gedolim. And gedolim could be big in size. It could be great as an attribute. But anyway, it describes in Genesis 1, two great lights, but then it goes on to specify the greater light to rule and the small, katon. Which one's the great light? The sun. Which one's the katon? The moon. The moon, katon from katan, small, moon. So that's a contradiction, right? Let's keep reading.
Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi explains, when God first created the sun and the moon, they were equally bright. Then the moon said before the Holy Blessed One, Master of the universe, is it possible for two kings to share one crown? God said to her, go and diminish yourself. She said before God, Master of the universe, since I had a correct observation before you, must I diminish myself? God said to her, go and rule both during the day and the night.
Okay, pause real quick. So let's just have a brief synopsis of what's happening, right? Two great lights, the sun and the moon. But the moon is the katon, is the smaller light. That's the contradiction that frames the Midrash. Now our story begins. God creates the sun and the moon. Moon comes to God and says, actually, I love the Hebrew. Ruth, do you have it? Here, or Helena or other Hebrews.
Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi Rami Katia.
Oh, actually, it's the second. I have it now. Efshar lishnei melachim sheyishtamshu beketer echad. Nice, right? Can two rulers share? Right. So that's the moon's problem. You've created two great lights. We're both ruling the skies. The sun and other traditions, other cultures have their own version of sun and moon fighting with each other, right? So here's ours in a sense, although they in themselves are not deities by any means. God is clear. They're coming to God's courtroom, right? They're coming to God and saying, well, there's a practical issue here,
But
right?
it's interesting, they also call the moon she.
I was about to ask, who's this?
Yeah, she is referring to the moon.
Oh,
Yeah, she is the moon here. Again, remember we were talking about the moon as being linked to symbolically to the menstrual cycle and
The moon's name is Luna.
Luna, which is
The
feminine.
sun's name is Sol.
Right. Good.
They didn't both go to God, though. It's just the moon did.
Correct, thank you, right, the moon did, right, the sun is not have an issue, but well, maybe because the moon is thinking ahead as it's feminine quality and, yeah.
Go diminish yourself.
Which is an interesting response, right?
Response.
But it's sort of, I mean, it's also a bit chutzpahdik, right? It's kind of the moon going to God, the master of the world, the creator of the universe, and saying, hey, something doesn't work in your plan, right? Like this doesn't make any sense, which to go to God and say, right, challenging God. And so God is saying, go diminish yourself. But Jackie is saying that's a bit harsh.
That's pretty nasty.
Right. And remember, what's framing this Midrash? What's the question that's framing this Midrash?
Is God sinned?
Is God sin? What is God sin? So you're sensing where the rabbis are going to come down is what was God's sin. Okay, now let's keep going.
She said to God, what is the use of a torch in the afternoon? God said to her, go, let the Jewish people count the days and years by you.
Good, sorry, I'm going to pause for just a second. So I also like this in Aramaic. Extra points if anybody can find that phrase in Aramaic about the torch. What good is a torch? Here it is. My revute deshraga betihara. It's just a mouthful and it's fun to say. What use is a torch in the middle of the day? So God is trying to actually make it right by the moon a little bit, right? The moon says, what? Because I said something right, you're going to punish me. And God says, okay, here, I'll give you this, right? You will rule. Let me explain to you why you're actually in a great position here, because the sun is only out during the day, but the moon is out in the day as well, and the night. So here's why you actually have an edge over the sun. Is that enough for you? And is it enough for the moon? No, the moon says, yeah, I might be out in the middle of the day, but what good is a light in the middle of the day? So that was Ron's point about back then. Maybe they thought that the moon was also a source of light, not just reflecting the sun. So they're saying the moon shines in the middle of the day, but we don't notice it because the sun is out. So its light is sort of, muted by the sun. So the moon is rejected. That's pittance, right? That's not enough for me, God. I need more than that, right? That's not making me feel any better. God is trying to reconcile the moon.
What happens in the middle of a Cleveland gray winter? No light for a long time.
That's right. The moon rules in Cleveland. So maybe that would have been enough. If God said that, I think we would have been satisfied. Yeah. Okay. So let's keep, so then what does God say next?
Well, she said to God, but the Jewish people will count with the sun as well, as it is impossible that they will not count seasons with it. As it is written, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years.
Good. So the whole seasonal, remember we were talking about how important seasons are for Jewish holidays. So God is saying, hey, moon, okay, I understand that the light in the middle of the day thing didn't work for you, but what about the fact that the Jews are going to be a lunar people? Their holidays are going to be based on you.
Yeah.
They're new moons, which remember the verse from the beginning from Numbers is about new moon offerings, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you'll have the new moon, you'll have all the holidays are going to be about where the moon is in its cycle. Is that enough for you? And what does the moon say?
But the
No.
sun also gets.
Yeah, you also count things by the sun, days and halachic hours are when Mincha Mari Shachar, you're going based on where the sun is in the sky and all that. So it's really not enough for the moon. Let's keep going.
God said to her, go, let righteous ones be named after you. Just as you are called the lesser, Hakatan, light, there will be Yaakov Hakatan, Shmuel Hakatan, and David Hakatan.
Okay, so what is clever, right? What is God saying here?
Small isn't so bad.
Small isn't so bad. The Jewish people are going to be small, right? All our heroes will be the Katon, right? David was the smallest of his brothers, right? He had all these big, beefy brothers. and Samuel, no, David, the little harp player by the sheep, right? That's the one who's going to be king, right? Samuel was actually very tall. He was a head taller than your average person, but he was small in his own eyes.
I was actually thinking of Saul, who was tall also.
Sorry, I meant Saul. Did I say?
You said Shmuel.
Sorry. So, right.
It says Shmuel.
Good. So I was thinking of Saul, but Shmuel Hakatan. Okay, so
I was
Shmuel,
thinking of Saul because he was from the smallest.
Right. Thank you. From Benjamin.
The smallest tribe.
Correct. He's from Benjamin. Good. Yeah.
And I think he was the youngest son too, wasn't he?
Yeah.
He's the younger brother.
Right. Not just size, but order in the, right, and that's what we're talking about, the youngest. Good. And Shmuel Hakatan and David Hakatan, right? So yeah, and Jacob also, Jacob compared to Esau, right? Esau was the man of the woods, the hunter, the hairy, the ruddy. And they say that Jacob was a yeshiva boy in the tent, right? That's what he did. He was a good.
Is it
Mama's boy.
Size matters comes from?
Right, exactly right. That's what it's saying here, right? Don't worry, it's not about physical size, right? It's about what's inside and who you are.
Quality, quantity.
Right.
Yeah.
Good.
Speaking from somebody your size.
But incidentally, Nelson says he's watching with captions and he put some notes up there.
Oh, good. Oh, good.
Discuss.
I was wondering why he was.
Of the sun, the moon blocking the sun.
Oh, Nelson, that's a very good point. So no, this Midrash doesn't get into eclipses. Our next Midrash, our next Midrash is going to get into equinox, autumnal equinox and the winter solstice. But no, this Midrash does not get into eclipse. But I think that's a great point, right? What if God had said, you're going to get a moment every now and then where you totally block out the sun? So is that enough? I like that. So if you had been an angel advising God in that moment.
The sun, there's no light on the moon either.
Right. So it continues. Good. Let's wrap up this Midrash. Sorry. And the spies themselves.
Spies saw themselves.
That's right. They were like grasshoppers compared to the Anakim, the giants in the land of Canaan. Good. Good. And that's something I want to touch on about size, about how, I'm going to come back to that. Let's finish the Midrash.
God saw that the moon was not comforting. The Holy Blessed One said, bring atonement for me since I diminished the moon.
So let's have some initial reactions.
God,
He made a mistake.
Right. So God is admitting to a mistake. And I want to say a couple of things because, and I want to bring this as a question to the group. Number one, I talk a lot of spiritual stuff with both of my parents and my dad. They're coming actually. So you'll meet them. They're coming tomorrow until Monday for Sukkot. So you got to meet them. But one of my dad's soapboxes is God does not have a learning curve, right? God knows. Anytime it seems like God, it's for us to stick. It's a test for us, or it's for us to, right? Like Sodom and Gomorrah, or binding of Isaac, and all these. It's God knows where we need to get to. It's us, not God. So that's his point. Now, but there are others who would maintain it's actually really revolutionary and helpful to conceive of a God who is dynamic and changing and not all perfect all the time. So it's really a theological question. And I don't think there's one right or wrong, and both are contained within Jewish thought. But I think you could read it both ways. Right. One is, maybe God is actually made a mistake and is big enough, talking about size, right, to apologize. A smaller God would not apologize because that means losing face. A smaller God would maintain that God is right because God has to be right. But while we know so many human rulers who would do that, God, the creator of the universe, is willing to admit wrong. So then why can't we? If God is willing to do tshuva, what's stopping us? So I think that's a beauty in reading it that way. Another way you could read it is, no, of course, God didn't make a mistake. God is perfect, but tshuva is so important to God. God is willing to model that behavior so that we learn from it. So I think you could look at both, but I want to bring it to, how do you read it? What does it mean to you if God is making tshuva here? Jerry.
I just want to point out that it's even more of a sin. It says here that God sinned because he diminished the light of the moon, but actually he didn't. He told the moon to do it to itself.
That's true.
It's even more of a sin.
So a bit of a mob boss, right? You make the orders, but you don't get your hands dirty.
I was gonna say, you can oversimplify it too, if you think about, a 3-year-old who sees a parent breaking a rule that they've given to the child and says, you're not allowed to do that. And the parent can say, well, I'm the adult, yes, I can, but it shows the importance of the behavior and the rule.
Yes, right. Sort of elevating Torah above all, saying that God's commitment to God's rules are so great that even if God is in breach of, or seemingly in breach of one, God will say, I'm in the wrong here because, Torah or my laws are even, I'm even held to that. I'm wanting to hold myself to that standard.
What's very interesting, if you say something like that, it makes God almost human in a way, but you can answer the Haredim who say, nope, this is the rule. In other words, they're making the rabbis who make the rules
Mhm.
holier than God. In other words, God can change
Right.
and decide, change his mind about something, but the Haredi rabbis can't.
Good. So that really resonates with me. And I think maybe many of us as conservative Jews, or I don't want to make assumptions, but B'nai Yeshurun being a conservative synagogue, sometimes there are stringencies that arise from a place of being uninformed, actually. And the more you know, the more you could actually find what is kosher, not just loopholes, but you actually know enough to say, well, yes, that is an opinion, but there's another opinion, that says this, and I actually hold by that. That comes from a place of being truly informed. And so the danger of saying, no, that's the rule, that's what it is it's a form of, I think, idolatry, where you're making, the rabbis God, right? Instead of engaging with it in a way that's more.
Well, they say that about Lubavitcher Rebbe, for example.
Right, so there's that as well.
Yeah.
That's another topic, yeah.
So to answer the original question, they created a story.
Yes. That's
But
Midrash.
it's- that- but it- Yes,
Yeah.
but it's a story,
Right,
yeah, but
right.
it doesn't answer the question for me.
Okay, why? How come?
Because the made up story, the moon talked to God, really?
Yes, you have to suspend disbelief a little bit, but
Did the snake talk?
that's true. There was a talking snake, but better than
How about the
moon,
donkey?
sure. But here's I want to say yes, right? But that's totally fair. Midrash can go off the rails. It's fanciful often. It can be but what I think is so brilliant about it, whether or not you buy it as having happened historically or factually, is they said, look, this verse from Numbers is about new moon offerings. So God is saying every new moon, which, by the way, is when the moon is seemingly its smallest, but then, right, also its biggest, right? God is saying, bring a sin offering for me to commemorate the fact that I once minimized the moon, or asked the moon to minimize itself, right? So every new moon, God is doing tshuva for that original act.
Real tshuva for God wouldn't it have been to say, go back to the way you were originally?
Once the decree of the king has been issued, it cannot be overturned or reversed.
Oh,
I don't know, but there's some quorum and there,
Yeah,
go ahead.
quorum, yes.
Or if God is doing this Shiva every month, then why does it have to be repeated? Why is there not atonement?
Oh, that's interesting. That's it. Well, I don't know. I think that's a great question.
He probably should only have done it 3 times.
Right. Well, maybe God is going the extra mile. But again, I think whether you look at it as God had a moment of learning,
Extra month.
or as God always knew but is modeling it. But I think one more thing, right? Where else does it say in the Torah that making the connection between God and tshuva, that God repented of having done something in Torah? It's soon after this story in Genesis, the creation story. It's actually the next chapter.
What it had to do with making man, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
When God destroys the world in Noah, the word used is tshuva, that God repented of having created human beings. So that's another question, right? Did God, again, it's a theological question. Did God know when God created us what was going to happen? Or did God hope that, it was going to be different, meaning that God didn't actually know what was going to happen? And then it's a question of free will. Do we have free will? Can we have free will if God is all knowing and knows what's going to happen? So these are all very deep questions to cogitate on. But my point in bringing it in our season of tshuva is that we believe in a God who is willing to do the work of tshuva. How much more so whatever's stopping us, should we get over that? Should we minimize our egos like the moon, right? Sometimes our egos or our pride make it such that we're unable to forgive or seek forgiveness because we would lose faith. How do we minimize, like God minimized the moon? What if God is telling us that sometimes we need to shrink the size of our own egos in order to do the work of tshuva? Because God isn't so, that even God can do tshuva. And you have a bigger ego that than the creator of the universe would, getting over that to do tshuva. Go ahead.
There's a second part to tshuva, which they don't talk about. Does the moon accept?
It ends on a bit of a cliffhanger. Right. Which brings us back to our initial question of are you responsible? Is it your obligation to forgive? Good. No, it ends there. So we don't know. We don't know. Any final thoughts on this before we move on to our last midrash? Okay. So this is a very different story, but you'll see the connections to sun and moon and season and tshuva. So who wants to read this one? Please.
The sages taught, whenever the first person saw that the day was progressively diminishing, he said, "Woe is me, perhaps because I sinned. The world is becoming dark around me and will ultimately return to the primordial state of chaos and disorder. And this is the death that was sentenced upon me from heaven, as it is written. And to dust shall you return."
Good. So pause. Lots happening there. I don't think it's referring to the first day where Adam is watching the sun go down and getting scared that this is doom and destruction. I think it's referring to the shift from the autumnal equinox to the winter solstice, when the days themselves seem to be getting shorter and shorter because it's getting, which assumes that they have like a clock and all that. But I think in the rabbi's mind, Adam is experiencing for the first time a move towards winter, where the days are getting shorter. Right?
Is it possible that
The rotation of the earth basically is what he's experiencing.
is it just possible that, after all, this was written after, there was a whole civilization before that. I don't know if the calendar was, established before this, but.
They would,
or
this
the
is from
season.
Talmud. They would have the calendar by now, yeah.
Yeah, but but for Adam, I'm talking.
Oh, for
about.
him, no, this
In
is
other words,
first person, no structured,
yeah, but when they wrote the story about Adam,
yeah.
okay, they didn't know there was a calendar from the other. Our stories are basically an answer to the Sumerian and the Ugaritic and all those stories of creation. So therefore, Adam does not, the fact that it says that there, that he sees the seasons and he remembers them, that's awfully strange that did he have something to write it, to mark down that, hey, look what's happening and to count it? How is he counting?
Right.
In other words, there's a certain assumption here.
Right.
That there was a means of calendar even in the time of Adam, or they're just skipping over it, they're glossing over
Not
it.
necessarily. When you start to wake up in the morning and it's dark.
But how are you?
You can tell that the day is shorter without quantifying it.
But the point is that I'm trying to make is, how does he remember it for the next year? It takes a while to figure this out.
I think this was the
Because
first
we
year.
already know that you have to interject,
Right.
days and.
Right. I think this is Adam's first year of experiencing the world. So for the first time, realizing, whoa, it seems like my days are getting shorter. It's getting dark faster. If this continues, the day is going to continually chip away until there's no day, only night, meaning God is punishing me with death. This is the sin of having eaten the fruit, and now we're going to be mortal, not just living forever in the garden. This is the ticking clock of my life
He
expiring.
must have made some sort of sundial so he could tell
Maybe,
Well, I mean, he had to have some way of saying, okay,
Right,
this
that's
is what's
something's up.
happening,
sure.
and then see, oh, but it's better now. First of all, this takes place where days are more even than we have it here.
Right, you're saying in
So
the
that-
Fertile
yeah.
Crescent and the,
Yeah.
yeah, good. Okay, let's keep going.
He arose and spent 8 days in fasting and in prayer.
What does that sound like? Hanukkah. Well, no, you need jelly donuts. This is sounding like our tshuva. See, this is Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, right? He's fasting, he's praying, he's repenting for the sin of having eaten from the fruit, right?
But 8 days in fasting?
Well, he's, everything is, it's all time is all long because we didn't have sundials. We don't really know. Yep, keep going.
Or, you know, fig was, how long did he eat it?
Right. Okay, keep
With
going.
big melon.
Right. I think it's a fig, because yeah, go ahead.
Well, now it's a fig? I thought it was a pomegranate.
Well, because,
8.
ah,
At night, huh?
but-
Oh, you only fasted during the day. You only fasted during the day.
It's the same
It
way.
doesn't say all day and all night.
exactly, correct.
It just says all day.
And the reason they think fig over pomegranate, because they then tied fig leaves to cover themselves.
Ah,
Yeah, cartoons tell you it's an apple, but there's
well, we know it's not.
no scholarship that it would be an apple. A fig is what people think. Okay, let's keep going.
Once he saw that the season of Tabat had arrived, he said, clearly the days are becoming shorter and then longer. And this is the order of the world.
Good, I'm gonna pause you. So when you hit Tevet, the month, the Hebrew month of Tevet, that's the winter solstice. So now,
Say it's around January.
right, so now it's starting to shift back. So now we're seeing, oh, wait, days are getting longer again. Right, there's hope.
Yeah.
And I like the Hebrew phrase for the way of the world. Let's find that.
In Hagoshel Olam.
In Hagosha Olam,
Yeah,
right?
she said.
So he had a, yeah, so he had a shift from feeling like this is punishment for my sin to Min Hagosha Olam. Oh, this is just the way of the world. There's a natural cycle going on here. Let's keep going.
He went 8 days on which he had fasted on the previous year. Oh, wait, he went and observed a festival for 8 days.
That's
Upon the
Pesach,
next
right?
year,
Which is only 7.
upon the next year, he observed both these 8 days on which he had fasted on the previous year, and these 8 days of his celebration as days of festivities.
So the larger context for this conversation, this is in tractate Avodah Zarah, which means strange foreign worship. It's idolatry, right? So the context for this conversation in the Talmud is holidays that are celebrated by the other nations, right? Sheila was talking about the surrounding influences in different, nations. So that, that are marked by idol worship, that their festivals include idolatrous practices. And so the question of like, where do ours come from as distinct and separate from that? And so this is a midrash that's coming up with an origin for our festivals and saying that, well, what happened was, and why are they always linked to like seasons like this, right? That's a question of, is it because we worship the moon? Is it because we worship the sun? No, instead there's this beautiful midrash saying, I bet Adam was really freaked out the first time he experienced the natural cycles of the world, that the rotation of the, right, that the days were getting shorter. And he thought it's because I sinned. But then realizes, and so he fasted, and that was the festival of fasting, but then realized, oh my God, this is just God's beautiful world, everything's okay, and turned the feasting to celebration. And so those are the origins for this festival.
I was
And then-
thinking he would have freaked out just by day and night.
Right, exactly. No, there's probably a lot of freaking out for the firsts of everything, right? Yes.
I understand the Tevet, which is Asara B'Tevet is 10 days.
Uh-huh.
They were probably morning, but what are the 8 days here? What's the referral to the 8 days? Is it Hanukkah?
I think maybe. It's a great question. I would want to look it up. I'm not sure, but that would be a good theory.
We have Sukkot as well, which is
Wait a minute,
That
Sukkot,
would be in
Would be
Tevet,
too
though.
soon.
No,
Yeah.
Sukkot
Yeah, but-
only in the diaspora.
right.
that's what we say that Hanukkah is a celebration of
Light.
delayed of Sukkot. In other words, Sukkot
Ah, okay.
delayed.
Yeah, right.
Sukkot in the diaspora is 8 days, not in.
Well, that's why I said the second one was Pesach in the spring,
Yeah.
but also it was, but I mean, when this was written, they were already in the diaspora, so it was 8 days. So they made the story 8 days.
Right, this is from Bavel, yeah. Go ahead, Jerry.
The other thing is, I understand why Adam was so freaked out. After all, God didn't have to make it that way. In other words, this is the way of the world, but God didn't have to make it
Right,
the way of the world. So that maybe there is some sinister thinking behind it.
yeah, sure, I mean, there's so
The
much.
phenomenon.
Yes, there's so much that if you're experiencing it for the first time, you know, it's an existential crisis. What is going, but then it happens again, right? Then it repeats itself. The sun goes down, it comes up, you know, and you then become, oh, there's this feeling of awe that, oh, there is something greater than my understanding at work here. And maybe everything's going to be okay. But that maybe God does have a plan, like the way the moon questioned God's plan. Right here, maybe there's this submitting to God's plan of like, oh, okay, I can ease up. I'm in good hands. Things are, you know, the world has a cycle and it's not endless darkness. But one thing I find so interesting, and the reason I wanted to pair these together in the greater context of tshuva is how does it change our relationship to tshuva and repentance if we see it as natural cycles, right? That there's a time for everything, that we're sort of,
Gonna bring in Ecclesiastes now.
yeah, right?
Because
The birds.
in other words, this is the way people are. We shouldn't freak out.
Right, minhag olam, right? This is the way of the
Yeah,
world.
that you see, you can change your mind, people can change.
Right.
God can change.
Right. And imagine Adam's self-flagellation, thinking, oh my God, what did I, you know, I'm terrible, I'm awful, I've earned this terrible fate. And then realizing, oh, wait, it's not like that.
It's also interesting, it's Adam. We don't even hear about Eve.
I don't know why Eve isn't in this. It's a great question. I'm not, I also
Because the rabbi.
felt her absence. Yeah, maybe.
Well, because it was written by men and.
That's what I said, the rabbi.
Yeah, no, that may very well be. I'm not sure why. I'd have to think about some other reason why, but
Somehow you get the feeling that the Bible is more oriented towards women than the Talmud.
yeah, I mean, there's so much, a lot of.
There's
female
credit
heroes
given
in
to
the-
women.
Yeah, in the Talmud, you have, I believe, 2 named women, maybe 3,
I
but
can't
there's
think of her name.
Yalta,
And the one.
Gloria?
Gloria.
Gloria.
Yalta and Bruria. I believe are the, I don't know if there's another named woman in the Talmud. Those might be
Is
the
it
2.
Berea?
Bruria.
Gloria.
Then she'd be
When
in.
you say someone is a Bruria, it means that she can do everything.
Yeah, we can have another session on that. One of my favorite texts from Talmud is a Yalta story. I think we talked about it at the nervous dog for the anger. This is going way back, but we were talking about anger. And there was a Yalta story there about breaking the barrels. Although, no, I don't actually think I brought Yalta. I didn't bring her to that for that one, but there's a great Yalta story about smashing barrels in anger. 300 barrels of wine. She goes into the wine cellar and just lets loose and because somebody offended her.
A woman.
Oh, sure. Nothing like a woman scorned, right? No fury. Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. Okay. But right. So instead of beating ourselves up and saying, how terrible am I, to see it as God has established natural cycles because God knows that we will fall short, but that's literally not the end of the world, that we have this opportunity for a bright new day, which is what we get to celebrate now as we're in, you know, post Yom Kippur, looking at as the seasons are changing, even though it's cold, right? It's getting darker and colder, to try to bask in some of that light and warmth of feeling like the moon, you know, rejuvenated. There is a cycle for everything. And I would love to hear some more thoughts and reflections as we begin to close out.
You said it so well that there's nothing.
That's interesting stuff. I love these texts. It's a larger conversation we could have about conceiving of a God who does tshuva, because that's radical, right? Usually you would think, no way, right? The God wouldn't, yeah, go ahead.
No, but theologically, that's always been an issue for me. Is God really capable of making a mistake?
Right.
Is he omnipotent?
Right.
And we hear both
Right.
in our from our sages. And I don't know which one is right.
Right. Yeah.
A little of this and a little of that.
A
Yeah.
little perfect, a little not so perfect.
For me personally, I like the Rabbi Kushner model that he presents in When Bad Things Happen to Good People, where he's like, the trouble is when you try to hold on to the big three, that God is all powerful, all good, and all knowing, because then they begin to contradict each other, right? If God is all good and all powerful, how do you explain when bad things happen to good people, right? God should intervene to stop those bad things from happening, right? So his claim is you can't have all three, but there is a way to have two. And, Rabbi Kushner experienced the tragic, horrific death of his son through a rare disease that was like a Benjamin Button disorder, if you ever saw that movie, but basically rapid aging, and it was just terrible. And he lost his son to this crazy disease and wrote this book as a theological response to what happened, which he said, I think it's because I can part with a God who is all powerful. I want my God to be all good, and I want my God to be all knowing. Those are important for me. But I don't need my God to be all powerful, in the sense that God has created a world that operates under certain natural cycles, the law of nature. The world just has, there is disease, bodies get old and die, bodies get sick. There is a natural law to the world that God does not intervene. Then you say, well, what about when God split the Red Sea? And what about the miracle? What about supernatural miracles, right? So I think he would say, but that's in our Torah, but it's not the way our current world operates. And so God, whether it's God choosing to restrain God's self, like God is all powerful, but chooses, but then that would be a God who's not all good. So I think he genuinely believes that God is not all powerful, and that's the one that he parts with.
God's a little more human.
So that's what's interesting, right? I'm channeling my dad screaming in my ear right now, going, "No, what are you saying?" Because again, this is happening in the context of, at least the Adam story, in Avodah Zarah and strange worship, right? So if we're humanizing God, right? Maimonides' big thing is, no, God is not human. Do every time in the Torah it says anything about God having an outstretched arm or a mighty hand, this is metaphor. Do not anthropomorphize God. God is not like people. We can't understand God. God is separate and apart from people. So that's one model. But then you have here where there are little bits of, again, we're created in God's image. We're B'Tselem Elohim, so there must be.
Yeah. As soon as you define what that means.
Right, that's right. No, right, but there is a little bit of humanization of it. You go too far, you're in Christianity, right? That God literally inhabits a human body, and so we're not there. But are there ways to say, well, we come from God, we have God in us. Maybe we can't understand God fully, but maybe there are, through getting to know human beings, you can get closer to understanding the divine. And I think that's a beautiful place to live. I think that's powerful.
Sometimes I get the feeling that God is being called in so many directions. He doesn't know who to answer first.
Yes, that's, if anybody, I don't know, this is showing a, generational divide. But if you ever saw the Jim Carrey, Bruce Almighty movie, it's where he gets to be God for a day, basically. And basically his email just is exploding with emails, prayers. I need this, I need this. So he decides, I'm just going to answer yes to all the prayers. So that way I don't have to worry about it. And then obviously the world falls apart because everyone's, it's chaos. But right, you have to imagine, that if you're seeing God as the way, if you're understanding God's experience the way we through our experience, you'd think God is very overworked. And
We have this problem when, Michael's favorite thing was when he'd go to a picnic, they say, well, Rabbi, don't you have any control? Make sure it doesn't rain.
right, exactly, right.
And, but it has to rain somewhere.
Yeah.
Because we need.
Right. That's
And
where
if you say rain at night, okay, well, what about the people driving it? In other words, you
can't win.
Yeah, you can't win.
He's put another note.
Oh, Nelson, you have another? Okay.
Which agrees with something I was gonna
God
bring up.
does fail to tell Moshe on Sinai the rule
about
of inheritance for a
sloth.
father.
Right.
No, but no sons. Then the amendment also causes problems, so it
Nice.
is modified.
Nelson, yeah. So Nelson's talking about Benot Slofachad, the daughters of Slofachad, who say, well, okay, the land is inherited through the sons, but our father died, didn't have sons, just the three daughters.
Five.
And 5 daughters. Sorry, the 5, sorry.
I have
5
to keep
daughters.
you on track.
Good. Fact checker, it's important. Sorry. The 5 daughters, our father was not in Korach's rebellion. He was a good, why should we be punished like this? And Moses says, good question. Let me check on that. Goes to God. And God says,
We check Google.
the daughters of Zelophehad speak correctly, right? So Nelson's pointing out, well, why did God is that a failing in God to have? Right. How did God fail to see that? Unless now I'm channeling my dad again. You say, no, it is.
He did on purpose so that Moshe had to ask.
Right. God wants us to step forward. Like any good parent, if you do everything for the children, they never learn. You want them to step up into their own. So God gave us that opportunity. And what's more, it means that we have a dynamic, evolving tradition that demands our engagement, right? When we see that instead of what Sheila was saying earlier about the problem with just saying, that's the rule. There's a rigidity there that says there's no room for growth and for our role but it's within our own too, that there's some within, but to say, no, I actually think there's precedent within our Torah for dynamism and growth and our role in shaping law, which brings us back to our very first session we had together, right? About the oven of Achnai and our role in shaping law and rules, that there's a partnership between us and God.
I always think if we are not given the opportunity to modify our behavior, we'd probably all be in trees and caves.
Yes, right? That tshuva is what makes us human in every sense. That's a perfect place to land. But thank you, everybody, as always, for all of your beautiful insights and participation. And may we continue to experience our season of tshuva with renewed vigor.
I think God